The wind carried the stench of ruin, thick and clinging, a foul blend of charred wood, scorched fabric, and the bitter tang of death. Smoke coiled lazily above the rooftops, a lingering serpent that refused to dissipate, as if savoring the misery it had wrought. The morning sky, once pale with the promise of dawn, now lay smothered beneath a grim veil of ashen grey. The House of the Forsaken stood at the heart of the devastation, a wounded beast caged in flame and ruin. Its walls, blackened and crumbling, sagged like weary shoulders beneath the weight of their own destruction. The roof had partially collapsed, leaving jagged rafters reaching skyward like skeletal fingers clawing for salvation. Only faint tongues of fire yet flickered among the ruin, their embers defiant even as buckets of seawater were hurled upon them by desperate hands. Figures moved like wraiths through the smoke, townsfolk, sailors of the naval armada, and scavengers alike drawn by the ruin. Their faces were shadowed, their murmurs hushed and grim. Some worked to quell the flames, their buckets forming a feeble chain against the creeping fire. Others lingered at the edges, whispering of tragedy and misfortune, their voices low and reverent, as if afraid the spirits of the dead might hear and stir. Through this chaotic throng, Vash, Gideon, Taron, and Althea moved with purpose, their steps swift and unyielding. The smoke stung their eyes and choked their breath, yet they pressed forward, driven by a dread that coiled tighter with each step. "Keep moving," Taron muttered, his voice tight. His gaze never left the ruin ahead. They wove between sailors and citizens alike, slipping past outstretched hands that sought to bar their path. None of the bystanders called after them. There was no need. The grim purpose etched on their faces spoke volumes. The group reached the alleyway that led to the back of the house, where the familiar outline of a crooked door stood amid the ruin. The frame hung half open, warped and scorched, its once sturdy wood blackened and brittle. Smoke poured from the threshold like breath from the mouth of some slumbering beast. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Vash's breath caught in his chest. The memories of laughter, of whispered schemes and warm fires shared among the Forsaken seemed to echo from beyond that broken door. Faces, Mira's quiet smile, Gareth's raucous jokes, Lyra's mischievous grin, flickered in his mind. But now those memories seemed thin, like threads unraveling in the wind. Gideon's voice broke the silence, low and steady, though his hand clutched the hilt of his sword as if to anchor himself. "We go in together," he said. "Whatever's inside, we face it together." Vash swallowed hard and nodded. Without another word, they stepped into the blackened ruin, into the heart of despair. The air inside the house was like a grave, thick, heavy, and unmoving. The walls, once adorned with crude drawings from the younger Forsaken and marks of their mischief, were now scorched black, their charred surfaces cracked and peeling like blistered skin. Ash clung to every surface, a grey shroud that masked what little life had once dwelled within these walls. The silence was oppressive, no laughter, no hurried footsteps, no whispered plans or playful scuffles. Only the distant crackle of dying embers and the creak of weakened timbers filled the void. Each breath tasted of smoke and death, the acrid stench of burned flesh seeping into their lungs, turning their stomachs. Vash moved forward first, stepping carefully over the warped floorboards, his boots stirring the soot that blanketed the ground. Each step felt like a violation, as though the house itself grieved and recoiled beneath his presence. His eyes darted to the walls, tracing the familiar paths they had once taken together, where Mira had scolded Silas for tracking mud inside, where Gareth had once carved his name with a dull knife, boasting that it would outlast them all. But Gareth's name was gone now, swallowed by soot and flame. The group reached the main room and Vash froze. Gareth lay sprawled near the hearth, his arm outstretched as though he had been reaching for something or someone. Blood stained his shirt, dark and stiff, and his face was twisted in a grimace of pain. Beside him lay Finn, slumped against the wall, his once broad frame reduced to stillness. His fingers were curled tightly around the splintered remains of a chair leg, now streaked with blood, a weapon born of desperation. Neither boy bore the marks of flame. Their wounds were deep, brutal, the savage work of blades and rage. "They fought back," Gideon whispered, his voice hollow. "They tried." Vash knelt by Gareth's side, his fingers hovering just above his friend's bloodied tunic. Gareth's face, once so full of humor and warmth, was empty now, his eyes half-lidded, the faintest trace of fear still lingering there. Vash felt something shatter inside him. "They shouldn't have been here," Vash murmured, his voice breaking. "They should have run." Gideon knelt beside Gareth's body, his fingers tracing the soot-streaked outline of his friend's face. "He always said he'd outlive us all," Gideon muttered bitterly. "Said nothing short of a tidal wave would take him." Taron forced a laugh, short, sharp and hollow. "Guess he was wrong." Taron knelt beside Finn, pressing 2 fingers against his blood-caked throat, as though some impossible spark of life might yet remain. After a moment, Taron's hand fell away, and he shook his head. "They didn't have a choice," Taron said quietly. Vash forced himself to his feet, his vision blurring as they moved deeper into the house. The air seemed colder now, heavier, the smoke no longer enough to explain the chill that gnawed at their skin. They found Lyra next. She was in the pantry, her small frame curled in the corner of a closet. Her fingers were still clutching a smaller child's hand, one of the younger Forsaken, a boy barely old enough to speak. Their faces were pale and still, their bodies huddled together beneath a tattered blanket. The fire had not touched them. They had died in silence, suffocated in the smoke as they hid from the horrors that stalked the house. Vash stared down at them, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They were just kids." His voice faltered, his chest tightening like a vice. "No," Gideon whispered, his voice barely audible. "They were Forsaken. They were family." They moved on. The back room was the worst of all. Ilara lay near the doorway, her body twisted and bloodied. The fires had found her. Her dress was scorched, her hair streaked with ash. Her arms bore the marks of desperate defense, jagged gashes that ran from elbow to wrist. A blade was still clutched in her right hand, its edge slick with blood. She had fought to her last breath, defiant even as her strength waned. For a moment Vash couldn't move. His mind refused to accept what his eyes knew to be true. Then his breath hitched, a broken, strangled sound, and he stumbled forward, collapsing to his knees beside her. "No, no, no, no." His fingers trembled as they reached for her, pressing against her shoulder, shaking her gently as if she could still wake up. "Ilara." His voice cracked and he shook her harder. "Wake up," he begged. "Please." But her body was cold beneath his touch, and her face, once so warm and full of life, was still and empty. "Come on, please," he whispered, his words unraveling into quiet sobs. His forehead pressed against her shoulder, and his tears streaked her soot-stained dress. His breath hitched violently as grief swallowed him whole. For a long time no one spoke. Even the distant crackling of embers seemed to fade beneath the weight of Vash's sorrow. At last, Gideon's voice broke the silence. "Jarek was right." His voice was thin, almost fragile. This was about me." Vash lifted his head, his tear-streaked face twisted with anger. "Don't," he snarled. "Don't say that." "You know it's true," Gideon said quietly. "They came looking for me. The house, the kids. They died because of me." "You don't know that," Vash shot back, his voice rising. "You think you can just decide this was your fault? Like that makes it better? Like that makes any of this mean something?" Gideon's expression hardened, but before he could answer, Althea stepped forward, her voice low and sharp. "If they were after one of you, they'll still be watching," she warned, "and if they see us here, they'll know they missed." The cold reality of her words sank in like a blade. "We need to go," Althea continued. "It's not safe." "I'm not leaving," Vash snapped. "Vash," Taron began, his voice strained. "I'm not leaving," Vash barked, his voice raw. "Not yet. Not until I know if Silas is alive." For a moment no one spoke. Then Taron exhaled heavily and shook his head. "Fine. But if we're staying, we check the tunnels. If Mira got out, Silas might have been with her." Vash's breath came in shallow bursts, but he nodded, wiping his face roughly with his sleeve. His fingers lingered one last time on Ilara's hand before he rose to his feet. "Then let's find them," he said hoarsely, "before there's no one left to save." The house was collapsing around them, walls sagging, beams groaning beneath their own weight, but Vash pressed on as if none of it mattered. His eyes were wide, wild with something that teetered between desperate hope and maddening denial. "We need to go," Gideon urged from behind him. "Vash, we've seen enough." "No," Vash snapped, his voice ragged. "We haven't." He barely registered the ache in his legs or the sharp sting of soot burning his eyes. His thoughts were fixed on a single truth. Silas was alive. He had to be. He could still see Silas's crooked grin in his mind's eye, hear his dry jokes muttered under breath, feel the hard clap of his hand on Vash's shoulder whenever things seemed impossible. He's alive, Vash told himself. He's stubborn enough to survive this. He's too damn stubborn not to. "Vash," Taron's voice was strained now, softer, almost pleading. "We've seen everyone. No one's left. If Silas was here, he would have—" "I'm not leaving," Vash snapped. His voice shook, his breath ragged. "He's here. He has to be. I'm not giving up on him." His chest heaved as he spoke, his face streaked with sweat and soot. Gideon stepped forward. "We're not saying that," he said carefully, "but the house is barely standing. If we stay much longer, we'll end up buried with the rest of it." Vash's breath hitched, and for a moment his eyes flicked to the blackened beams above, weakened timber that could give way at any second. "Then let it fall," Vash muttered. "I'm not leaving without him." Without waiting for a response, Vash turned sharply and pushed deeper into the ruined house. They followed him in silence, Gideon muttering a curse under his breath as they moved through the crumbling wreckage. The path to the old escape tunnel lay beneath the back room, a concealed hatch tucked beneath a floorboard that only the Forsaken knew about. Vash knew the way by heart, yet everything felt different now, warped and twisted by smoke and ruin. The air thickened the deeper they went, each breath sharp and heavy with soot. Vash's fingers scraped against the scorched walls as he pressed forward, each step faster than the last. "Vash, slow down," Taron called out. "You'll—" But Vash didn't stop. His heart hammered in his chest, his mind racing. "He's here. He's alive. I'll find him. I just have to keep moving." He reached the back room at last, or what little remained of it. The walls were scorched black, their edges curling inward like charred paper. The floor had partially collapsed, leaving jagged planks that formed a skeletal pit below. "Where is it?" Vash muttered to himself. He stumbled forward, dropping to his knees and raking his fingers through the ashes. "Where is it? Where is it?" His fingers found the scorched frame of the old floorboard, the one that concealed the tunnel. His heart lurched. "Here," he gasped. "I found it." Behind him, Taron and Gideon exchanged a glance, one of reluctant hope, and hurried forward. Vash tore at the ruined floorboard with blistered fingers, splinters biting into his palms as he wrenched it aside. The familiar iron ring of the trapdoor gleamed beneath the soot. He grabbed it, heaving it open with a cry of effort. The tunnel yawned before him, dark, cold, and silent. The air within was thick and damp, carrying the scent of earth and rot. "Silas!" Vash's voice shook as he called into the tunnel. His voice echoed back at him, thin and empty. "Silas!" He didn't wait for a response. Before either Gideon or Taron could stop him, Vash plunged into the darkness. "Vash!" Gideon shouted after him, but Vash didn't look back. He stumbled blindly through the tunnel, his boots splashing through shallow puddles. The walls pressed in around him, damp stones slick with moss and grime, but Vash barely noticed. "Silas!" His voice was hoarse now, raw from smoke and grief. "Answer me!" No reply. He pressed on, breathless and shaking, until at last the narrow tunnel opened into a small, hidden chamber, the old bolt hole where the Forsaken had stashed their stolen goods and kept themselves hidden when patrols prowled too close. Vash's breath caught in his throat. Mira lay slumped near the wall, her body still. The blood streaking her face had long since dried, and her arms were still curled tightly around something. No, someone. "Silas!" Vash's voice broke as he staggered forward, falling to his knees beside them. Mira's body was cold. Her fingers, locked in rigor, were still grasping at Silas's arm, as if she had died trying to shield him. But Silas, he was there, still, unmoving. Blood, far too much of it, soaked his clothes, streaking his face and hands. For a terrible moment, Vash thought it was too late. "No!" His voice cracked. "No, no, no!" Then Silas groaned, a weak, barely audible sound, but enough to shatter Vash's despair. "He's alive!" Vash gasped, clutching Silas's face in his hands. "Hold on, and you're all right. You're all right, okay?" Behind him, Taron and Gideon arrived at last, their eyes widening at the sight. "He's breathing!" Vash shouted desperately, tears streaking his soot-stained face. "He's alive!" But Althea, who had followed silently behind them, lingered at the threshold. Her sharp eyes flicked to the scattered bodies, brutalized, torn apart in ways that no blade or common fight could explain. "These weren't just pirates," she murmured grimly. Her voice was tight, cold. "These were reavers." Vash barely heard her. His fingers clung tightly to Silas's bloodied shirt, as though letting go would shatter what little hope he had left. "We need to get him out," Vash choked. "We're not leaving him here." His face was pale, his hands slick with blood. But Silas was breathing. That was enough. It had to be enough. The air in the sewers was damp and stagnant, a cloying mixture of rot, mildew, and filth that clung to their clothes and seeped into their skin. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, slow and rhythmic like a clock, counting down to some grim inevitability. The flickering glow of their lone lantern barely pushed back the oppressive darkness, and every shifting shadow seemed to leer at them from the walls. The four of them sat in silence, Vash, Gideon, Taron, and Althea, their faces drawn and hollow. None of them spoke at first. There were no words for what they'd seen, no way to explain the ache that gnawed at their chests. Vash knelt beside Silas, who lay unconscious but breathing, his face pale and blood still caked in his hair. Vash hadn't moved from his side since they'd fled the ruins of the House of the Forsaken. His hand still rested against Silas's arm, as if the faint warmth of his skin was the only thing anchoring him to the moment, to hope. "We can't stay here," Althea muttered, her voice low and grim. "If the Reavers were willing to break Kjordriath, if they find us down here—" "Where else can we go?" Taron asked. His voice, usually calm, wavered. "The Forsaken are dead. The house is gone. There's nothing left." Those last words hit like a blade. Vash clenched his teeth, forcing himself to keep his gaze on Silas, on that faint rise and fall of his chest, the only proof that death hadn't stolen everything from him. "We'll figure something out," Vash said, but there was no strength behind the words. Taron gave a bitter laugh, dry and humorless. "Figure what out? We've got nothing." His voice tightened, the words catching in his throat. "All of them. All of them are gone." The silence that followed swallowed everything. "I might know a way," Althea said quietly, her voice cutting through the gloom. Vash finally lifted his head. "Where?" "My uncle," Althea answered. "If anyone can keep you alive, it's him." Gideon scoffed. "Your uncle?" His voice was sharp, incredulous. "The same uncle you've been hiding from?" "I wasn't hiding," Althea shot back. "I just didn't feel like being paraded around like some prize." Her voice hardened. "But I'm still part of the guild, and Caspian doesn't ignore me." "That doesn't mean he'll stick his neck out for us," Gideon muttered. "He won't," Althea admitted. "Not for nothing." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I can't just walk in and tell him to take you in. The only way this works is if I convince him you're worth the risk." "Worth the risk?" Taron repeated bitterly. "How?" Althea exhaled. "By convincing him to take you in as crew." "Crew?" Vash's voice sharpened. "You mean join the guild?" "It's the only way he'll agree," Althea said firmly. "If you're crew, you're under guild protection, his responsibility. It's the only leverage I've got." "You think you can promise that?" Gideon snapped. "You think Caspian's going to let you just waltz in and offer up some half-dead Forsaken as new blood?" "No," Althea said quietly. "I don't." She swallowed hard, the weight of what she was asking clear in her eyes. "I don't get to make that call. Only he decides who joins the guild." "So what exactly are you planning to do?" Taron asked. Althea's gaze flicked away for a moment, then she squared her shoulders. "I'm going to ask." "That's it," Gideon said. "You're just betting our lives that he'll say yes." "I'm betting what's left of your lives on it," Althea shot back, her voice sharp. "Because if you've got a better idea, Taron, I'd love to hear it." He didn't answer. None of them could. The silence stretched again, heavier now, the kind that settled deep in the bones. Gideon let out a sharp breath. "And if your uncle says no?" Althea's gaze darkened. "Then you'll have nowhere left to go." Her voice was low but certain. "But I won't let that happen." Her words felt less like a promise and more like a prayer. For a while no one moved. They simply sat in the filth and the dark, 4 survivors bound by loss, fear, and the faint flickering hope that somehow they might still have a future. The flickering lantern cast a feeble glow, its light dancing across the damp walls like restless spirits. Shadows twisted and stretched along the stone, swallowing the corners of the tunnel in darkness. The air was cold, but Vash barely noticed. His body ached from exhaustion, yet his mind refused to quiet. He sat beside Silas, his back pressed to the wall, knees drawn to his chest. The others sat nearby, Taron with his head in his hands, Gideon staring blankly at the lantern flame, and Althea leaning against the wall with her arms folded tight across her chest. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Vash's thoughts wandered, back to the faces he knew he would never see again. Gareth, grinning as he told some ridiculous joke that no one laughed at, only to double down until they couldn't help but crack a smile. Finn, always laughing too loud, his voice a constant reassuring presence, even when times were hard. Lyra darting through the house like a shadow, her nimble fingers quick to snatch a coin or sneak a stolen pastry into Vash's hands when he hadn't eaten. Ilara. Vash's breath caught in his throat. Ilara, the woman who had taken them in, who had scolded them like a mother yet fought for them like a lion. He could still hear her voice in his head, that sharp bark of command when she chased them away from trouble, or the softer tone when she knelt by his side and told him that the Forsaken weren't just outcasts. They were family. Now she was gone. They were all gone. His chest tightened and he clenched his teeth, swallowing hard against the lump rising in his throat. He felt like he was drowning, sinking deeper with each breath. He lowered his head to his arms, his fingers curling tightly against his sleeves. The silence stretched on again, heavier than before. For Vash, it felt like losing his family all over again. The Forsaken were gone, their home reduced to ash and memory, the streets they knew, the scraps they had fought for, the little life they had built together. It was all gone. The emptiness clawed at his chest, sharp and relentless, like grief he thought he'd buried long ago. And whatever awaited them now, with the reavers prowling in the dark and no true home to return to, was uncertain at best and deadly at worst. Vash let out a breath, bitter and ragged. "We're still here, but for how long?